Hello everybody and welcome back to another new vlog. Thank you for joining me once again. As you can see, I'm in a woodland once again and there's quite a lot going on in here. So I'm just going to talk you through something that I'm going to do in just a moment. But first of all, have you ever noticed when you watch YouTube videos that quite often you'll see quite a lot of landscape photographers who are talking about woodland photography and saying how difficult they find it to achieve anything within a woodland? Well, that's the case for everybody, I think, but today I'm going to try and show you one or two little hints and tips that I use myself to try and get some decent shots within a woodland. The first problem that people quite often encounter is the fact that the woodland is very chaotic and hectic and there's always quite a lot going on. Well, one of the solutions that I use to try and avoid this problem is I get to a woodland early, try and spend a few minutes just having a wander around and a look at what's going on and see if I can find just one interesting subject which I can use to anchor an image and to draw the viewer's eye into the image so that they are looking at this one particular subject and everything else around them seems to be slightly less important, and it's always that one subject that kind of gives you the sense of what's going on within the woodland. So what I've done today is I've come into this particular woodland. It's one I've been into quite a few times before, but never actually in this little section of it here. And as I've walked in, I realised why I've never been in here before, and it's because it is very dense and kind of chaotic and hectic, and it's going to be very difficult to find a shot. So I've spent a few minutes just having a wander around to see if I can find that one interesting subject, and I think I've found one where I can demonstrate exactly what I'm talking about here. Just behind me you'll see this tree here, which is just a very straight tall tree that goes right up here with a little bit of light on the one side of it, sunlight coming through the trees, and then just where that light starts, at the bottom of where that light starts, there's another tree behind the first tree which kind of comes up and creates a triangle with the two trees and then kind of intersects the first tree just behind where that light is shining. And I think that makes an interesting composition. I'm going to set it up now and I'll shoot it in portrait orientation, because that for me needs to be shot in a portrait orientation because of the height of the tree and the width. So this is going to look better being taller than it is wide, if you see what I mean. So I'll set this one up and take the shot now. So I hope you can tell from that first image that I was focused on the first tree that I was looking at, and the second tree just behind it was close enough that that was almost perfectly in focus as well. But behind that, the background and all the trees behind it that make the scene very chaotic and busy, they are dropping out of focus, so your eye is naturally drawn to that first and second tree right in the middle of the image, which anchors the image and gives you that point of where to look in the photo. So hopefully that's quite an interesting tip for trying to improve your photography within the woodland. I'm going to move on now and see if I can find another subject, because the one of the other problems that people have is sunlight coming through the trees and bits and pieces of sky poking through where you can see what's going on behind the trees and the sky's coming through, and often that's overexposed. So I'm going to go somewhere where I can show you an example of that as well, and I'll show you how to overcome that. This is a great example. Just behind me I've got a silver birch tree that I'd like to photograph, but as you can see, just behind that we've got bright blue sky outside the woodland, and obviously that's encroaching into the image when I try and shoot a portrait orientation of this particular tree. So the problem I've got is trying to work out exactly how to expose this image, because if I expose for the highlights, that's the blue sky coming through the tops of the trees, then my shadows, the tree itself, are all going to be too dark in the image. But if I expose for the shadows here, then the blue sky and the highlights coming through there are all going to be too light in the image. So the idea here is to take 3 shots, and I will bracket the exposures. Now, you've seen me do this before, but I'm going to show you exactly what the process is here. First of all, I'll take an image where I'm exposing for the shadows, and that will mean the highlights are blown out. I'll take a second image then when I'm exposing for the highlights themselves, which means the shadows are too dark. And then I'll take a third image, which is an exposure somewhere in between those two. And then when I get back to the computer and post-process these, what I will then do is combine those 3 images together, and I can take out all the best light from each of the 3 images, creating one master image that's got the best of all the light all the way through the 3. I'll show you what I'm doing, I'll show you the composition, and I'll show you the raw files before I show you the edited image. So now with these 3 images, you'll see the first of the raw files is a shot taken at f4 where I'm focused on the trees themselves, and I'm using a shutter speed of 1/125th of a second. Now what this will do, you'll see from the image, is it makes the highlights perfectly exposed in the top of the image, but the shadows in the foreground seem to be a little bit too dark. So after shooting that image, what I've also done then with this second image is use an exposure time of 1/30th of a second. Now that is 2 stops in terms of light, lighter than the first image. And what that does, of course, it blows out the highlights completely, and you'll notice that in the image. But as you look at the shadows on the trees themselves, they are just perfectly exposed. However, there is one issue with that. There's also some mid-tones that I haven't quite captured properly yet with the right exposure. So what I've done then, instead of shooting at 1/125th of a second and one at 1/30th of a second, I've then put the exposure back in the middle of those two at 1/60th of a second and taken a third image. Now those 3 images will all be combined together in post-production to give you this final image. Of course, there is one other thing that you can do in that situation when you're taking shots like that, even if you are bracketing the exposures like I just did, and that is you can leave a little bit of space around the edges of the image and around your subject, so that when you do get back into your post-processing, whichever editing software you are using, there will be a crop tool built into the software, and you can use that basically to crop into the image and remove some of the edges of the image, so that you get a much better crop and get a much better focus on your original subject, but also you start to lose some of that highlight area that's surrounding the edge of the images. Now there is yet another option, and I want to try and show you that with my next composition, so I'll go and find that now and then I'll show you what I'm talking about. You can of course apply a compositional crop within your images just by zooming, and there are obviously a couple of ways you can do that. I've got a few trees behind me just at the edge of this woodland here, with a little bit of a path that runs in between a few of those trees, and I want to try and get in quite close to some of these trees here and just kind of capture a very tight crop around the trunks of the trees, leaving out the leaves and all the foliage above, and just capture the tree trunks themselves and the path running through the middle of them. So here's what I'm going to do. So this is what I'm looking at here. Just in front of me you can see these trees that I want to photograph, and it's kind of the trunks of these trees here and like a rectangular crop just around the trunks of the trees with that little bit of path running between them. Now obviously this looks a little bit too far away to be taking the shot. At the moment I've got a zoom lens and I'm currently zoomed out as far as I can go at 17mm. So if I wanted to, I could simply turn the zoom ring of my lens up to 40mm. Now that still seems a little bit too far away for my liking, so if I wanted to zoom a little bit further, either I would put on a lens that has a longer zoom, or I could simply pick up the tripod and move my camera closer to the subject, and I'll show you that now. As I just get that little bit closer to the subject, the crop becomes a much better one. I'm going to zoom out a little bit because I've got a little bit far, but the crop becomes a much better crop. So you can see now that where I want to photograph this tree here, and we've got the path that runs along the side of it, and then there's this tree here and this one here as well, and that is going to be my composition when I take the shot. So that's it then, folks. If you find that the woodland itself is far too busy and you're finding it difficult to work out what the composition should be, concentrate on one subject and use that as an anchor for the composition. And if you got a bit too much light and highlights in the image, like I've got today with all this sunlight, then what you could do is bracket your exposures like I've done today, so you get separate exposures for the highlights, shadows and midtones, and then blend all those together. Or if you're finding that you're too close or too far away from your subject, either zoom with your lens or zoom with your feet. If you've enjoyed this week's vlog, please remember to give it a thumbs up and to subscribe to the channel. And if you want to make any comments on what I've shown you today, and if it helps you at all, then please let me know in the comment section down below. And I look forward to seeing you again on another vlog very soon. Bye for now.